Well, good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and the city council to plan for orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings and to make recommendations to the city council on agenda items. Please note that the city council rules state that public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at www.topeka.org. Many of tonight's cases involve public hearings. For those cases, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Second, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then third, we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and will be limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take roll.
Mr. Beardmore,
Here.
Mr. Beck,
Here.
Mr. Crook,
Here.
Ms. Cuevas Stubblefield. Here. Mr. Gales,
Here.
Mr. Haw,
Here.
Mr. Jefferson,
Here.
Ms. Jordan is absent, and Mr. Lackey.
Here.
We have 8 members present and we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Last meeting's minutes, were there any amendments, corrections? I did have one that I did, well, I won't mention the other one, we already talked about it. On page 5, about middle of the page, starts Mr. Beck asked his CPTED requirements. There at the last sentence says expressed evergreens would be appropriate to hide the facilities, but I wanted to add there, but not necessarily for safety. The point was good for screening, but not necessarily keeping people visible.
So noted.
Any other comments?
Move we accept the minutes.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Pass. Item C, Mr. Fyander, any communications this evening?
Oh, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, just a reminder, we do not have a meeting next week, which is our normal policy meeting. We also passed out for the first item, actually you have several communications that I'm seeing here. We passed out, I think just tonight, was for item E3, there was a sample ordinance with some sample language that to have you consider tonight. Then there was also some communications sent forth from the city attorney's office as well. Just making sure, if you don't have those, and if you want them, we want to make sure you have them in front of you. Otherwise, if there's any questions, we're here to help.
Okay. Any questions for staff communications? Seeing none, we'll move on to item D. Any declarations of conflicts or ex parte communications on tonight's agenda items?
Mr. Chairman, I have a conflict of interest with items E1 and 2.
Okay, thank you. I also have a conflict with items E1 and 2, so I'll be stepping down and Mr. Gales will take over. Any others? Okay, seeing none, we will just jump right in here with items E1, and Dennis and I will excuse ourselves. Scott, I turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Mr. Finder, when you're ready, I think we'll get started.
Thank you, Mr. Interim Chair. E1, this body deferred that item last month as well as E2. I wanted to just summarize where it was left and then bring you any new information forth. This was deferred to today to help clarify some information. One of those questions, there was two really questions that we tried to help clarify. One is how this relates to the comprehensive plan. This project, in terms of particularly its density, I think was a question, seeing that and how that fits in to the comprehensive plan. I had, and then the second question was, there was a question about Huntoon, I believe, and any impacts this project may have on Huntoon. So we'll address that second. The first, we put a memo in the packet from myself to the commission, kind of overview of how our current comprehensive plan and then our update that we're going through, how this fits or doesn't. And without just rehashing the entire memo, the gist is we do want to have density, since that was kind of the question. We do want to have density where we currently have services, where we currently have infrastructure. So that means water, sewer, fire, police, roads. And in this case, being adjacent to our regional commercial center, which is the Wanamaker corridor, our model within the comp plan shows for a progression of intensity from that commercial center, regional commercial center. This is a region, and when we say regional, that means beyond Topeka, beyond Shawnee County. This draws people in from beyond those boundaries. So emanating out from that center would be where we already have our infrastructure and our services. You would want density. You would want that return on investment that you've already put in. For instance, 17th Street was improved, extended to Urish. Urish will also be improved south of 17th here in the next year and a half. County's also looking at improvements to Urish north of 17th. There are conditions in the PUD that would address, if that doesn't get improved, how to address that. But suffice to say, the investment has been made here by not just the city, but by also the owners in the area. This owner in particular, and Menards was largely responsible for putting in the road. Now that it's there, that's where we want our density. So the fact that it's on the fringe, it is on the fringe of our regional commercial center. It is definitely in an area where we already have our services and our infrastructure in place, or is planned. This is something we look at when we actually do the annexation. So this is in terms of, is density appropriate here? I would say it is. Does that mean, and as we push forward on an updated comprehensive plan, the principle of compact development has become the pillar of that new update. And so we want to have compact development, single-family development, continuing to sprawl out and spread out, doesn't necessarily have is not sustainable in terms of return on investments and fiscally responsible growth. We have made these investments in this area, so we do want density to follow. I'm going on and on, trying to pretty much saying the same thing. The other thing here is you want compact development because you also want transportation choices, and that means the closer you can be to the regional center for commercial services, closer you can be to have, the more people you can have closer to that, the more people could select another modal choice that doesn't have to be a car. Walking, biking, and in transit. So this does fit the plan, fits what we're updating in terms of compact development for the new comp plan. So I think we want to, if there's any questions about that, I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Okay. Do we have anything from the applicant that needs to be presented in further detail?
I think they want to update something here as well, and let me just touch on the second question that was left at the end of the meeting, and then
Okay.
pass it off. There was a question about traffic on Huntoon, how much this would create. I'd like to have Bill Hoover just kind of address that and summarize what we found.
Good evening, Commissioners. Based on the traffic study that was submitted to the city, I ran the numbers out there, and on Huntoon, east of Urish, the 2014 counts that were released by the state of Kansas KDOT showed it at 4,506 annual daily traffic. And I look back in the previous count, which was 2009, it was actually 5,100, so it dropped 600 trips. Started thinking about that, and it's like, well, 17th getting punched through has dropped part of that. And the other big thing that's happened is the widening of Southwest 21st Street. So there's a couple key things that affect this, but I ran the project's traffic up there and made the presumption that 75% of the traffic from the project was going to or coming from Huntoon east of Urish, and 25% would be going north of Urish or coming from there. And part of the reason I had more of it going down Huntoon was it's an easy place to jump on the interstate. The project's traffic, based on the traffic study, would take the 4,506 trips there, increase it by 156 to 4,662. That would have an increase of 3.3%. When I previously done traffic studies, we used the figure of 5% for something to be significant. And going up Urish, then it was 208 trips. Urish south of Huntoon is currently at 7,350 trips a day. If you add 208, that would be 7,558 trips, and the project's traffic would be 2.8% of the traffic on the road then.
So, if I may summarize, there's not a significant impact to Huntoon. And if we're seeing numbers in the 4,000 to 5,000 ADT range on there as a 2-lane arterial, there's still another 3,000 plus trips to add where that starts to become a real issue, and we start to probably need to do what we did to 17th Street. One way of looking at that is obviously anything that comes along in the future that would add to that road along there, we would look at that differently than we do than what we look at along 17th. Meaning what the speech I just kind of gave you about density, our infrastructure is not in on Huntoon. It's not. The road isn't in. So we do have to take that into consideration as development proposals come along on Huntoon. On 17th, I think it's a wholly different matter. We do encourage more density. Yeah.
Is there any questions for staff before we move along here? None at this time. Did you indicate there is any new information to be shared by the applicant, or no
I think they have
changes?
I'm sorry.
No changes or anything like that, or?
No changes, but I do think they want to present some information based on the questions regarding density. They have a couple exhibits I think they want to show.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Would a representative of the applicant please step forward?
Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Vernon Jarbo, Sloan Law Firm, 534 South Kansas. and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. With respect to the applicant's contributions to 17th Street, the applicant donated not only right-of-way, but helped pay the costs to the tune of, as I understand it, $242,000 for the improvement of 17th Street, so that part of this infrastructure improvement that's available is actually put there by this applicant, and obviously partly in contemplation of the opportunity to hopefully develop this site at some point along the way. With me tonight, I have two people to speak on behalf of the applicant, and then I'll try to answer questions at the end. First, I'd like to have Stuart Elliott, who's been involved in marketing the property for the last 10 years or so, come up and talk to you a little bit about what's gone on with this property over the years.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. 10 years ago, we sold this piece of property to John and Barbara Hoffer as a future investment. Over that 10-year period, we've had dozens of people that have contacted us and were inquiring about using the property. We consistently, over that 10 years in visiting with the Hoffers, found that it was not in their or their neighbors' best interest to piecemeal the property, to take a piece here and a piece there, where there was no control at all, and that's why we're here. We'd like to have it arranged so that there is some control over its use, so that everyone can use it to the maximum, and basically that's been our desire continually over that 10-year period.
Okay. And sir, for the record, for record-keeping purposes for Mr. Wickling, I didn't want to interrupt you when you got started. Could you state your full name and your association?
My name is Stuart Elliott. I'm the broker with Realty Professionals, 2900 Southwest Wanamaker Drive here in Topeka.
Thank you very much.
And I think the key element, the reason I asked Stuart to be here tonight, he wasn't here the other night, was to help you understand. Part of the reason behind putting this in a PUD was to provide that kind of comprehensive plan that is a subset of your comprehensive plan, and that's really the reason the developer is going this way with the project. I'd like Mr. Boyd to come up and talk to you about the details and hopefully answer part of the questions you had last time about the use of the, yes, sir.
Mr. Jarba, I just want to make sure I understand one of your first comments about the amount of funds that were donated on behalf of the owner to the 17th Street project.
Yes, sir.
Did I understand that correctly? Is like $242,000?
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, which I got it orally from Mr. Hoffer today, is he donated the right-of-way for the improvement of the street. There's also a drainage easement at the very corner of the parcel, the property, which as I understand it, it looks like a dry drainage basin to me. Maybe Mr. Boyd can help you understand what it is if you're curious, but as I understand it, that was a drainage easement that was part of the project for the construction of the roundabout there at Urish and 17th, and so Mr. Hoffer donated the easement for that as well as a right-of-way for the street, and then also put $242,000 in cash into the project.
Thank you.
Take notes just in case I got it corrected.
Okay. Good evening again. Mark Boyd with Schmidt, Beck and Boyd Engineering. Really only two things that I wanted to add from where we were at last month. Provided you with two handouts. There was some discussion last month about density and of the multifamily portion of this. And one of no, it's not this one, but the other handout and of the apartment complex comparison. This is just graphically what I used to come up with the 13 units per acre that is in the zoning document. A variety of different apartment complexes around the city, variety of amenities, ages, solar locations, some being more interior towns, some being on the fringe. Where we're at with the density is not out of line with some of these larger apartment complexes in town. So that, one piece of information I wanted to give you. The second piece of information is the actual development prospect that drove us to where we're at with this rezoning. This was the 7.5 unit multifamily residential community that was proposed as the first piece of development for the multifamily. This is what we brought into the planning department with our initial discussions. And the reason I'm showing you this is not to assert that this is ultimately what's going to happen. I don't want to mislead anybody to that effect. This project is still under development. It hasn't been contracted to the owner. But this development is what we used to put the infrastructure where it's at. We designed the street around it. We've designed the lot lines around it. At this point in time, this is a pretty good indication of what is planned to happen there. As I said, though, between now and then, anything can happen in the development world. So when it came down to zoning this property, we really felt like we needed to plan on, put within the PUD the zoning density potential of what this property could handle, and not what is actually being planned. So I guess as you look at this, this is basically about half the density of what's being proposed on the PUD document. Beyond that, I'll just open myself for questions.
Just for clarity, when you, your last couple comments, I want to make sure what you were simply stating is the design that's being proposed for approval is only utilizing half of the density that's technically available through the zoning.
Correct.
Okay.
What you see here is about 7.5 units per acre, a little
Okay.
under. These are duplexes, triplexes. It's a planned elderly housing community. Fits very well on the site, and it works well with the infrastructure we have in place. This is kind of what drove our discussions with the 29-foot wide Kings Road. This is also what drove the traffic impact analysis to have a threshold in it component to have a second look and a review if the density goes beyond that 7.5 units per acre. So as much as we like this concept and as much as we hope this becomes a reality, as part of zoning this document, we had to look beyond that and plan for contingencies.
As a designer, a site designer, and I know you guys do layouts, what have you, if I, to best understand what would allow you then to increase this density, you would literally have to change the style of units being proposed here. You would have to do more of a garden-style apartment or a central core multi-unit kind of stacked type of design, which would completely alter the utilization of the site. It's not, this is more suited to more of kind of the standard residential area that's, you're just doing it in duplexes and threeplexes. To go with a higher density, to still stay within the zoning, you're talking about reconfiguring this, you'd have to do parking lots, so that you would be an entire different design and have to come back for approval for that design.
Well, I don't know that we would have, that the owner would have to come back for approval for the design.
Through the building inspection and what have you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which you would
Even
for
this
one, yes.
development in
Yeah.
itself is subject to site plan
Correct.
review.
Correct.
Being multifamily. So, yeah, to increase the density beyond this, you're mostly looking at probably 2 to 3 story level buildings clustered around parking lots, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know that you could get the density any higher with a single level housing than this. This is pretty much utilizing the first level.
Yes.
Mark, this drawing is pretty small.
Yeah.
The only outlets you have are on Huntoon and 17th, is that correct? There's none on Urish over there?
There's one outlet on, there's none on Huntoon. The property dead ends at the Westland Society's property on the north.
Oh, okay, I see.
And it would be up to them to continue on
And
with
make that
Kings Road to
connection.
make that connection. There is one connection on Urish, that'll be a private street. Everything other than Kings Row on this plan that you're looking at is private, be private streets.
So that one connection would be
Yeah.
kind of in the middle there, is that where it is?
Correct.
Yeah. I see it now.
There's a connection right there on Urish, and then everything to the east funnels through Kings Row.
Okay.
Well, if they're small private streets, that'd certainly discourage a lot of traffic going through, but
Yeah, and I think that's still up for discussion, what those streets could ultimately look like. I think it's gonna be a trade-off between parking and width, whether they post them no parking, and I think that'll just be played out in the site development stage. Whether they're full 29 feet, if they wanna try something smaller, narrower.
Any other questions for Mr. Bolden? One other question, Mark. Could you elaborate one more time why you didn't, I think I understand, but I want to make sure it's clear. There's a reason why you didn't align Kings Row as it continued across Urish,
Well,
or, I'm sorry.
and that's fine, there was
17th.
discussion early on about that. We felt like the valley, the drainage valley, drainage way would make a difficult connection. To line up Kings Row, make the turn, and to cross that draw a nearly perpendicular manner would have been difficult to make. Once we make that turn, now you've got to come clear over to the west to allow some development space. It pretty much annihilated this plan that was in front of us. Just couldn't get the units in as they wanted them. A secondary factor to that, I think, is destroying a natural buffer as we saw it between a higher intensity C4 commercial with the rest of the development. It's a great natural buffer for that kind of activity. Again, I think the planning department looked at it, and I don't put words in your mouth, but I think they looked at it as a break in the connectivity of a possible arterial street, make people make that maneuver. So I think it fit the development as we visioned it in its configuration.
Okay. And I realize my fonts are small here. That is a stream buffer, a mandated stream
is.
buffer through there. Yes.
It is.
Okay.
It is kind of meaningless because the topography makes it much greater. You know,
Understood.
There's plenty of unusable width in there.
Okay. Any further questions from Mr. Boyd? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're not gonna make me do it, are you? Thank you. Well, we wanted to be able to, I read the minutes from last meeting, we could tell that you were struggling some with this density and really what was driving all of this. And so, even though, as Mr. Boyd properly said, there really is no contractual commitment at the moment to build the housing project in the configuration you're seeing, this is really what drove this project and caused us to think about the whole tract and what would you do with the rest of the tract if you put the housing on the tract this way. And I went out and looked at the tract. I don't know if any of you got out there and got in the middle of it, but it really suits the zoning classes very well. The topography lays nicely. Obviously, there's a couple of really steep ravine areas, both the one that forced the decision with respect to Kings Row and on to the north where we're showing a detention, very, very steep in there. And so you really weren't gonna build any streets or any buildings in those areas. And I think those are two topographic features that partially control development, but they also provide a nice buffer to the projects once they're built, because if we can leave trees and vegetation in those areas, then it should make a more attractive housing project if it gets configured as we're seeing. Now, as Mr. Boyd said, other than Kings Row, the other streets in here are all private streets. And so I think it's, Mr. Gales, I think you asked the question about if we were gonna go up in density, would we not have to start over? The Kings Row configuration kind of sticks you with leaving it the way it is for at least those lots that face out onto Kings Row. Now, I suppose arguably you could go with more density in the area to the west of Kings Row or Urish, and maybe to the east, although that site starts getting geographically or topographically challenging, so I'm not sure you really can very much. But we think that the commercial site on the corner is an appropriate, it's the right place for it. Obviously, there's commercial all the way, you know, if we go across the street to Menards, and then on to the east over to Wanamaker, that's all commercial, so we're not looking at real heavy duty commercial here, but this seems to fit nicely in the neighborhood concept and create the walkability that we'd like to see in modern development. And this last weekend, I had the opportunity to be up in Lincoln, little city about our size that we're often compared to. And one of the things I noticed as I drove around Lincoln is they have done a really good job of putting the infrastructure in first and watching development come to it. So there's a lot of 4, 5, 6 lane streets out in the middle of nowhere, and that's kind of what 17th Street is here. And this may be one of the first times we've actually seen where the city has a street first and then development can come to it. But that's the purpose of putting streets in first. And I know I watched Clinton Parkway develop. I did a lot of eminent domain work on Clinton Parkway when Lawrence built it. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There was no development out there. And you wondered where are all these drivers going to come from? And by golly, they're there. So I think this use of 17th Street and the capacity it creates, plus the fact that the city, or rather the county, is getting ready to widen Urish from 17th to 21st. They're in the beginning phases of acquisition right-of-way right now. We've got clients that are in negotiations with the county, so that project, I think, as Mr. Gander said, is 2015. So it is well underway, and this appears to be a real good fit for this project. And so we'd ask your approval, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Jarbo. Any questions for the applicant's representative?
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, with the update from the applicant, I think it's, with the permission of the commission, I think we should probably open this back up and give the opportunity for the public to say a few words. Any thoughts?
Good, chair.
I think we'd need to move forward with that. Will that require a vote, Mary? Or since we had closed the public comments before, will it require a vote?
Make a motion to open the public hearing again.
All right, well, I'll make that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Seeing none? Okay. I'll let Chris and Bill get things squared away there.
We're gonna get a map up here, so people can refer to it and you can see it, but, give us a second. I think we have the old technical difficulties.
Okay. While Chris is getting that, I'll just kind of refresh the audience. The audience members that elect to come up and speak will get 4 minutes. At the 1 minute remaining mark, the light will indicate you have 1 minute left. We do ask that when you come up to the microphone, you introduce yourself and your address. And please try and be brief and to the point, but we are interested in hearing your concerns or observations. So we'll give Chris a minute here. Breaking in new equipment, so we'll get it all squared away.
Mr. Chair, we may, while we're in the holding pattern here, there are 2 items for this. So I think at the last meeting, both of them, there's the zoning and then there's the plat.
Yes.
And if you'd like, if commissioners would like, we can, take comments on both of those at the same time, but you would have to make a separate motion, when it gets time to take action. So,
So what you're saying at this
Yeah.
time, go ahead. At this time, we're not required to take action on that.
no, I just wanted you to know that there can be comments on both, if you want.
Correct.
Comments can be on the plat, on the zoning, because they overlap much, in some respects. The traffic study is tied to both the plat and the PUD.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Chair, I think it would be good to take comments on both and then separate at the end and speed things up a little bit.
Okay,
All right, well, we'll just move along.
fair enough. Okay, with that, is there anyone here from the audience that would like to step up and speak on behalf of this project? If so, please do so, and as we indicated, state your name and your address, please.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Helmer, attorney and trust officer at Core First Bank and Trust, legal owners of the property, commonly known as 1505 Southwest Urish. It's the property directly west and adjacent to the Wrangler Ridge proposed development. I also read through the minutes. I came and gave comment last meeting, and basically everything there I think still stands. The issues that were kind of brought up tonight would include the drawing submitted with the 7.5 unit per acre residential development, I think is pretty clearly more in line with what is already in the area. However, directly south you have 1 unit per acre residential development, and then to the southwest in the Hidden Valley Division you have substantially less dense residential development as well. I think the primary issue that we as the trust owner and the ultimate beneficiary of the property have with this planned use development is that it's simply too broad. To ask for up to 16 units per acre on the good faith assurance that it would probably be somewhere around 7.5 units is not enough to assure the trust or the beneficiary that the detrimental impact of this sort of project on the trust property is limited. With that being said, as Mr. Boyd said, yeah, it's a nice plan, but anything can happen. So in addition to the residential density, you also have that C2 commercial on the northeast corner of 17th and Urish. We have heard nothing of what may be proposed there. The C2 zoning permits a wide range of uses from retail all the way up to hospitals, funeral homes, that sort of thing. So without having any indication of what is actually planned under this planned use development, it's very difficult for us to ascertain what detrimental effects there would be. The only other thing I would bring up tonight is the issue of stormwater. According to the stormwater report, there are 2 areas on this property that potentially drain onto the trust property. Those are the northwest corner and the detention pond on the southwest corner. According to the stormwater report that's available on the Planning Commission's website, the increase in runoff could be 3-fold, perhaps even 4-fold in some of those areas. The trust property contains a lake, an 8-acre lake that is used as a recreational facility for the owners and users of the property, as well as to assist with water management throughout kind of western Topeka and Shawnee County. There's been no analysis that I'm aware of as to what effect the runoff will have on that pond dam, and that is of obviously large concern to us and to the beneficiaries of the trust property. So without having any additional analysis on what the increased runoff, again in the stormwater report, it said that the lot 1 basically has between 70 and 80% impervious surfaces. That's a lot of water. What that will do to an 8-acre lake and what that will do if an 8-acre lake's dam is washed out could be catastrophic. So we would certainly like to see more analysis on what is planned to happen with all this water in the event it does start raining again someday. That would be nice. So, I think that's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Helmer. Any questions or?
Yeah, I have a question.
that dam have a constructed spillway?
I am not aware of that. The beneficiary of the property who's been a resident is here, and I would defer to her to answer that.
That would make a big difference.
That would make a very large difference. The pond, I think, was originally constructed in the 1950s, so even if it had a spillway constructed, I don't believe it would have contemplated this level of runoff. There was conversations between Mr. Probasco, the original owner of the property, as well with Mr. Jarbo, actually, when the Hidden Valley development went through. There was significant concern at the additional runoff from that southern property. In that situation, there was an agreed kind of settlement of sorts that permitted them to continue with development, provided they added mitigation efforts. So, again, I'm not sure how that spillway was designed.
Well, it would make a huge difference on how much drainage area that lake encompasses and how much drainage area this is in comparison to that before we could, or I could understand how much of an impact it had.
And I guess I would be suggesting that it be the Hoffers under the planned use development that they study. This is their runoff water. It's going to end up on other people's property, and they've already provided for some of those mitigation efforts in the stormwater proposal, but neglected to look into the nature of the trust's property.
Any further questions for Mr. Homer? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in regards to this particular?
Hi, I'm Lou Probasco, the beneficiary of the trust of the property, of my husband's property. I think my concerns center around many of the same issues. My husband was extremely concerned about the runoff from the Hidden Valley and the extensive things that they constructed. This is not an insignificant lake. This is an 8-acre lake that is, when we had the view up there, you could see. And I think there's a need to be looked at is what is the benefit even to the community in the event of a drought or something to that effect. And that at minimum, they shouldn't just say, oh, there's nothing here, and ignore it. That it is not responsible not to be looking at that. Currently, we have cattle on it that use it as well. Anyway, I think it's very significant, and we need to look at that and shouldn't be casually just saying there's no effect or we'll fix it if there is. Also, I don't know much about floodplains, but I know I found in the files, my husband was quite upset because we got a notice that we were in a floodplain. It was changed from a low to a moderate risk, high risk, to a high risk floodplain. And so I think the results, and when I called the city on that, they said, or the county planning department, he says, oh no, it's just the, see if I say it right, the north corner of our property, which would be Huntoon and Urish, that it's a fringe floodplain. But I did notice, and I'm not an expert, anything to do with floodplains, but I noticed they said, oh, there's no floodplain here. And I know that we had gotten that letter, and it's a portion up there in the upper corner. I don't know how the runoff all works. I think the thing also that bothers me the most is, you know, we knew someday there'd be residential development is what we hoped, and you know, that was the use when the people bought this property. I think it's the use that's deserving for the people to the south that have nice 1-acre lots. It's a community, and we're destroying that when we put in all of this development. But I think the thing that kind of bothers me the most is just, yeah, it's nice to have a planned urban development. What's the plan? Is it going to be a funeral home there at the roundabout of 17th and Urish? Is it going to be a printing press? Is it going to be a hospital? I mean, what is it going to be? And I don't know if the problem is with the lack of detail by the owner, or is the problem the lack of the detail, the broadness of the zoning, what's allowed in each zoning area? And that kind of bothers me. I told you before, as having been just recently sold our interest of 10, 15 years at Watergate, I think it was the first planned urban development in DC, it was specific. We had a hotel, We had the apartment buildings, we had the grocery stores down below, and it was very specifically developed. So I think that's one of the problems, and the other problem is, I just think the high level of apartment complexes is just too much for us and the neighbors there. I think it's just, I don't fault anyone for trying to get the most out of the land. I'm sure that if there was different beneficiaries to the trust, they would be here in support of that. But this is my home, and I just think it's too broad of a use, and it's not detailed enough to let us analyze whether we all can live with it. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Ma'am, any questions for Ms. Probasco? None? Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in regards to this? Mr. Feiner?
Mr. Vice Chair, I think on the storm, can I address the stormwater?
Please
I
do
missed-
so.
And if the applicant would like to touch on that as well. This, standards are now that if you create runoff on your property, it has to be not only detained on your property, but it also has to be treated for quality. So we look at quantity and quality now, and when a new development comes along, let's say they build here, any new water that they create because of impervious surfaces would have to stay on the property. It cannot be transferred into someone else's property or even into the current stormwater system. So those, I see in the plat that the stormwater plan had been approved, but that there's specific improvements when they come along and develop for retention and also quality treatment that will be approved at the site plan stage. But suffice to say, there shouldn't be any new water coming off of this property. And if, Mark, if you want to address that anymore, and if I misspoke, please
No,
correct me.
you summarized well. I would clarify a couple things. This might be a review for a couple of you, but I'll go through it regardless. The stormwater management report that we supplied to the city for this development analyzes existing conditions. What are the conditions today? What are the conditions when you apply development runoff factors in a general sense to the site? Any stormwater that is released off the site post-development cannot be greater than what exists today, and that's the whole purpose of establishing a baseline. So whatever development runoff is caused by whatever retail activity or multifamily activity happens will be held in a detention. It'll be treated, held in a detention, metered out at its existing level. The stormwater management report was written in its current condition for a purpose that we don't know what's going to happen down the road. The city has site development review processes in place, so as a specific development is proposed to be built, a second stormwater management, not necessarily report, but calculations kick in specific to that development. So the initial report sets up conditions and guidelines that you follow. When the property is actually under development, calculations specific to that site will be made, and stormwater quantities will actually be calculated and detained. That's where detention ponds actually get sized and treatment plans actually come to fruition. So it's kind of a two-step process.
Mark, just to be clear, on your issue, when I drove down there the other day, I didn't see any like bridge or opening a culvert or anything in which there's a creek or anything that runs under the road. I did see a couple corrugated metal pipes that appeared to drain the ditch from one side to the other. There's no change in that in what's proposed as part of your improvements, right?
No.
Okay.
No, you know, it's, a brand-new road project down there as part of that roundabout improvement in
Mhm.
17th Street. There was a certain amount of drainage study that was part of that project. A small detention pond was created and condemned and created at the corner of 17th and Yurch on the Hoffer property for that storm water to drain into. You know, I don't see any infrastructure improvements. Again, whatever happens on the Hoffer site is going to get metered out at a rate that the existing culverts can handle, and no more. You know, I might add that it's not customary for us to analyze regional ponds, drainage ways. It would be nearly impossible to do so. The protection of the surrounding reservoirs and drainage ways really goes back to the site stormwater management plan and how you're gonna handle the additional runoff created from that development, and keep it on site until can be released.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Boyd? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mark, when you size detention ponds, my curiosity, what frequency do you use, design frequency, stored frequency?
I can't answer that for you, Mike. That's a PE question that Kevin Beck designed that.
Okay.
I don't know.
25, 50?
Oh, for the,
When you size the ponds, what do you?
when you
what-
size the pond, you know, I probably should know that, but I don't. I'd have to look in the report.
A lot of cities typically use 25 years. That's the reason I wondered if you did
It
that.
seems to me that the street projects are designed for 25 years. It seems that we design on-site detention for 100.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess if I could, I just wanted to, just because some people might have an issue, there's always the question of rate versus actual amount of runoff. And yes, you will have a greater impervious area, so you will have a larger amount of runoff, but you're metering that out at a rate that's less than or equal to what it is today, correct?
Correct.
The idea is that the pond downstream, the lake downstream, hopefully has a spillway adequate enough to drain it at a certain rate. You'll be adding water in at a rate less than that. Therefore, you should actually be, you know, taking water away from them. Well, not taking water, that's a better way to say it, but lessening the impact on that dam. I would assume that's the goal.
You would expect that.
So if there was a floodplain or a floodplain fringe, you would probably actually be helping that theoretically. You'd be lowering that amount or keeping it the same.
Because it wouldn't hit as fast or as size.
Right.
Thus is the principle of the detention facilities on these
Right.
development sites, rather than just letting it go.
So you do have more water actually going through, but it's running through, and you're,
It's running through faster, which is the need for detention.
No, you're not.
yeah, I just thought I would clarify that in case anyone had any questions as to rates versus total amounts.
Any other questions for Mr. Boyd? Thank you, Mark.
Well,
Is there anyone else that would like to speak that's in the audience? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close the public hearing part of this. Any questions or concerns of staff? What's
Mr.
the-
Chair, I originally had concerns about the traffic. That's been adequately answered to my satisfaction, and also the water discussion, so
Okay.
I have no objections to it.
Any other observations or concerns?
What exactly are the staff recommendations? My papers are all messed up.
Oh, sure. The staff recommendations are supportive of the project. We have several conditions, 12. Is that right?
There are 12 in the
Go.
PUDs, and then the plat had
Oh.
5. There was one, I wanted to clarify, that the one that was added meeting about the addition of the extra permanent construction easement. So there are 5 conditions before you, in the subdivision report. And I can, with the 4 there are, I don't think the staff report that was mailed out to you included that last additional condition that was added on at the last meeting.
Did you go with the extra easement, utility easement?
We are still recommending that. I don't think it was ever resolved. And then there was also an additional, in the PUD staff report, there was an additional recommendation about the pedestrian connection that was left unresolved as well.
Mr. Driver, I think Mr. Boyd is maybe prepared to address that item they have a concern with. Would you please step forward, Mark, and address that?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess as far as the easements go, I think our owner and client is prepared to grant whatever easements are necessary, expand the force main easement out to the street. It was not my intentions last month to get into that kind of a discussion. I thought of more of it as a policy issue, but no, we're prepared to accept all the conditions, both for the PUD and the final plat.
Okay, and that's the understanding of staff too? Okay, thank you. Any further comments, questions, concerns? Is there what's the desire of the commission here?
I'd make a motion that we accept the staff recommendations and approve the zoning as recommended.
Okay,
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, concerns?
This is just zoning, right?
This
Yes.
is dealing with E1, yes, zoning. Okay. Chris, we have a motion and a second. Good call.
Mr. Jefferson?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan is absent. Mr. Lackey?
Aye.
Mr. Beardmore?
Aye.
Mr. Beck has abstained. Mr. Crook?
Aye.
Ms. Cuevas Stubblefield? Aye. Mr. Gales?
Aye.
Mr. Hall has abstained. The motion passes with a vote of 6.
Okay, so with that, we'll immediately proceed to E2. It's my understanding we were utilizing the public hearing as well as the owner's presentation for both items. Is there any further elaboration that needs to be done from staff? No? So that having been said, is there any, and this is dealing with the plat item as noted in E2, agenda item E2. Any additional concerns or questions? The applicant has indicated they've accepted the staff recommendations as noted. Mr. Lucky?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we accept the plat as submitted and the staff recommendations as listed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lucky.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further questions, concerns? Hearing none. Chris, let's take roll.
Mr. Crook?
Aye.
Ms. Cuevas Stubblefield? Aye. Mr. Gales?
Aye.
Mr. Hall has abstained. Mr. Jefferson?
Aye.
Ms. Jordan is absent. Mr. Lackey?
Aye.
Mr. Beardmore?
Aye.
And Mr. Beck has abstained. The motion passes with a vote of 6.
Thank you. Give 1 minute for okay, this moves us to action item E3.